All right, good morning. Good morning, everybody. We're getting a little bit of a late start. Thank you all for coming. I'm so happy to see a room full of beautiful students and faculty and deans and our guest speaker. Welcome to our Diverse Stories in STEM lecture series. My name is Iman Ataris, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Animal and Veterinary Sciences. I'd also like to introduce my colleagues, Dr. Janelle Ortiz up here in the front, and Dr. Rachel Blakey, who's probably running around trying to get the students to come in. But the three of us embarked on this journey back in January as part of a cafe-sponsored workshop on anti-racist teaching and learning. And we were inspired to come together to create a speaker series that highlighted diverse people in STEM specifically. And as STEM students, many of you know that it is very difficult for minoritized groups to kind of break the field and to go into STEM. So I'm so happy and excited to have our very first talk. I would also like to introduce our guest of honor today. We have Dr. Cindy Pickett, who is our Presidential Associate for Diversity and our Chief Diversity Officer for Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer, and she will introduce our speaker for today. Help me welcome Dr. Pickett.
Right. Thank you. It's wonderful to see so many faces. And it's my pleasure to introduce the speaker today. So Dr. Wilkinson received her undergraduate degree from Cornell cum laude and her PhD from UC Berkeley, where she currently works as a postdoc at the Shell Lab, with an additional appointment as a research associate at the California Academy of Sciences. Her interdisciplinary research integrates movement ecology, multidisciplinary mapping, and participatory approaches to find effective, equitable, and inclusive conservation solutions for human-wildlife conflicts. She is dedicated to communicating her science to a wide audience and is a National Geographic Explorer, Schmid Science Fellow, Switzer Fellow, and a member of the IUCN Hyena Specialist Group. She is also passionate about celebrating the work of people of color in wildlife ecology who remain underrepresented in this field. Her work co-founding Black Mammalogists Week and co-developing the People of Color in Wildlife Ecology database is helping to inspire a new generation of wildlife ecologists. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Wilkinson.
Thanks a lot, y'all. So I'm going to go into the darkness. So hopefully you can still see me in the darkness where I have to use these buttons. So yeah, thanks for that introduction. That was really lovely. I really appreciate all of you being here. It's wonderful to see so many students who I love talking to the most when I give talks. So yeah, I'm a postdoc at UC Berkeley, research associate at the California Academy of Sciences. And today I'm going to talk with y'all a little bit about who I am and my own identities and intersectionality and how that feeds into my interdisciplinary approach to basically studying and trying to mitigate human-wildlife conflicts. And I'll give you a little bit of a case study approach to a few different locations in Kenya and in California where I do this work, and then leave on maybe a point of hope about how we can bring our own identities into our science. And I just want to say, it's been a really, really heavy week for all of us. I think here, many of us in the room might be directly or indirectly affected by the events going on in Israel and Palestine. And I don't want to just breeze over that because I know that some of you are bringing that, or maybe all of us are bringing that into the room today. And I'm all about really acknowledging who we are and bringing our whole selves into the space and making space for that. So just wanted to put that out there. So before we jump in, I'm gonna experiment with Slido. So check out this QR code, use your phones, or if you can't use the QR code, use this code at slido.com. And the question I have for you is, what are your favorite local wildlife that you have seen this year? No wrong or right answers. And the reason I'm asking you this is because A lot of my work is about connecting ourselves with the animals that we live right next to in more positive ways. So let's see what y'all say. Coyotes, okay, what? Yes. Oh my gosh, you guys, I love that. Okay, deer. Ooh, I love the snake species coming out here. Someone saw a humpback whale, jealous. Vermilion bunting. Who's the birder in this room? Where are the birders at? Okay. Okay. Some twitchers here. Love the possum. What other ones do we have in here? Ooh, skunks. I love that more than one person appreciates a skunk. That is awesome. I also appreciate a skunk. And snakes. I really don't like snakes, right? I mean, no, I love snakes. This is a San Francisco garter snake, the most beautiful snake on the planet, right here in California. I'll give it a couple more seconds to participate. I feel like, I don't know, y'all. I normally when I talk to people, I don't get so much coyote love from the jump. So I'm pretty excited about the coyote love. All right, thanks, y'all. This was awesome. I hope this gives you a sense. I know this is a commuter school mostly, but I think many of you live in a close proximity, and we have many of these species right here. So to give you a sense of the animals and the type of place that I grew up in, I was born and raised in Queens, New York. That's me, and that's my sister. She's kind of mean, but we were close back then. And I would spend all the time going to the Bronx Zoo. So this is at the Bronx Children's Zoo. We grew up pretty poor. So in the summertime, they have, actually, I think it's all year round. Wednesdays are free. Of course, I was in school during school year. So in the summer, I would go every Wednesday to the Bronx Zoo for free day. I lived pretty close to this famous World's Fairground. You might have seen it in a fantastic classic movie, Men in Black. Those are the little spaceships. So yeah, that's kind of where I grew up. And I was always running around Queens, pretending like I had my own nature show. So I was finding squirrels and cockroaches and cicadas and hornets and kind of like pretending like I had my show. I would come to the dinner table like plastered in cicadas and their exoskeletons. My mom absolutely hated that. And I would kind of pretend that this was my show. But I actually, even though I watched all the nature shows, I loved Jeff Corwin, I loved Steve Irwin. I had no idea how to get into that realm because it was always these cis white dudes on TV, right? And I just knew I really wanted to work with animals, but I didn't know how. It was only later in life, that's also me, as an animal, right? So I realized I actually had wanted to be an animal. I realized later in life, rather than just working with animals. I actually remember saying one time that I wanted to grow up to be a lion, which is kind of weird. And I remember in 3rd grade, I spent like half of the school year pretending I was a dog with the very creative name of DOG. Yeah. I don't know. I remember my teacher would let me sit under the table. So, like, I was that kid. I know you all knew a weird kid like that. Like, I was that kid. And somehow I didn't grow up to be a furry. No shame to the furry community. But I always knew that I wanted to work with animals. But, you know, regardless of what my background was, I've started now to really think over the past 10 years or so about how being a queer, Black, intersectional person kind of has helped me to consider the things that we have in common with the animals that I study, which I'm going to talk about a few of those animals today. And I think there's a lot to be gained from bringing our whole selves into our science and using our intersectional lenses to look at old challenges in new ways. So we're going to jump into the science, and you're going to get some flavor of that now. So we know that carnivores and people live alongside each other in even the most quote unquote pristine landscapes. So, and that we also influence each other's well-being. So for instance, I took this picture in the lower right. This is a leopard in the Masai Mara National Park. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Serengeti. So you might have seen the Serengeti on TV as this beautiful, pristine landscape. This is the same ecosystem. It's just the northern part of the Serengeti. These are all tourist vehicles. I was out there doing work, and we actually count the tourist vehicles around the carnivores when we see stuff like this. And what you can't see is that the leopard is actually using those cars to better hunt a gazelle more efficiently. So even in these pristine locations, we're influencing one another, right? And humans and carnivores are inextricably linked across the globe. And two of the carnivores that my research focuses on that can really illustrate human-carnivore interactions are coyotes and hyenas. Coyote love that. And I think that's so much better. Look at that. Can y'all still see the screen okay? Okay. So I think that we actually have a lot in common with these two animals, and they also have a lot in common with one another. So what do they have in common? How many of y'all see this movie? Okay, keep your hand raised if you think they did hyenas dirty in this movie. Okay, there's a couple of you like, I'm not sure. Okay, I hope that by the end of this talk, I will have convinced you that they did hyenas dirty in this movie. So basically, like, Disney wasn't the first people to do hyenas dirty. They had their own reputation across their range before that, but Disney did not help. And they are vilified, they're persecuted across their range, they're depicted as being mean and stupid and evil, when in fact, they're actually very family-oriented social animals, and there's a bunch of wonderful things I can say about them. The other thing is, many of you might have heard that spotted hyenas have very unique genitalia. And so their genitalia is also something that causes people to fear them even more, fear this unknown, which contributes to this persecution. And if at any time the light is too much for the screen, someone just shout out and I'm sure they can change it. Coyotes are also vilified. So on the left, we have a picture of wolf pelts. White folks in the USA really tried and succeeded in killing off the wolf. But in so doing, they opened up all of these spaces for coyotes to fill in the gaps without the threat of predation by wolves. So we started killing them too. So those are pictures of coyote pelts. And they're really, really vilified. They're considered to be vermin. And in fact, some of my colleagues and I have been trying to estimate the population of coyotes in North America. And we found it to be pretty impossible, even just in the US, because there are about 25 states where they sort of keep track of the populations, but the range is like from 150,000 to 750,000 in one state, like not very helpful. The other 25, these animals are classified as vermin or the equivalent. So you can either get a permit really easily and kill them, or you can just kill them and you don't have to tell anyone about it. And the government agencies don't keep track of the dying coyotes, let alone the living ones. Actually, this is actually pretty timely because the Wildlife Photographer of the Year event was just last week or this past weekend in London at the Natural History Museum of London. It's a famous event, worldwide photography competition. And there's a whole exhibit about the USA's wildlife killing contests. So coyotes, bobcats, all these ones featured, and that person won a lot of awards for that photography exhibit. So we're kind of known for that. But, oh, and the other thing I want to say about this is I wrote an essay, I think it was earlier this year, where the plight of hyenas and coyotes, I was talking about how it mirrors the plight of my Black slave ancestors, as well as some of the intersectional identities that I hold today, including being queer. So I think there's also a lot that we people, many maybe in this room, have in common with coyotes and hyenas. And that empathy is really important. The good news is that hyenas are awesome. So I just included one example. So this is a progression of skull development of a spotted hyena, and you can see the sagittal crest getting taller, more robust, those zygomatic arches also getting bigger and wider. And what that shows you is that there is this huge jaw muscle connecting to the sagittal crest and going through the zygomatic arches, and they have really, really strong bite force. So they can actually chew and digest bone, which is what this photo is all about. I took this photo in my field site in Kenya, and the scat of spotted hyenas is often very easy to find because it's pure white from the calcium in the bones that they digest. So they're really efficient environmental cleaners. And in fact, there was a paper a couple of years ago based in Ethiopia. They studied a couple of different locations and then modeled what would happen if you took all the spotted hyenas out of the landscape. And essentially what they found is that there would be a lot more livestock and human diseases, which then trickles down not just in public health, but into the economic outcomes for those areas. So these animals could be really, really important for human health as well as for their ecological roles. Coyotes are also really awesome. So these pictures were taken in San Francisco. These guys are really making it work even in dense cities like LA, where I also study coyotes, and where y'all have probably seen some of the coyotes in LA. And they're keeping our rodent populations in check. They're filling that role of apex predator where there aren't any wolves or mountain lions, that kind of thing that we kind of take for granted. Unfortunately, they also get into things, so they can really piss us off, right? And get on our nerves and cause us some challenges. They can eat people's livestock, they can eat people's pets. This is a cat in that coyote's mouth in San Francisco. And even if like you might be like me, where you think that cats shouldn't be outdoors because they can kill wild birds and that kind of thing, and they can be at risk, it's a really emotional thing to lose a pet, right? It doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with the person. That's an emotional thing. And then people's livelihoods can be affected by having their livestock lost. So I just included this video because I was sitting at a den, and often when I'm at the dens, the younger hyenas try to chew my tires. So like that's my own human hyena conflict. Luckily, nothing crazy has happened. I haven't gotten stranded yet. But something to remember with interactions between people and wildlife is that even one event that happens that's negative or something that you've heard of in your community can trickle down and affect your fears or concerns about those animals for the rest of your life, and then what you choose to do around conservation or management of those animals. Even what you hear on the media can influence how you think about and treat these species. So on that note, what are your least favorite local wildlife? Be honest. Don't be shy. Nobody knows it's you. Possum, snakes, mosquitoes, I know, right? I am blessed to not be bitten by mosquitoes in this country. The Kenyan ones love me, though. Slugs, mice, cockroaches, I love them all. That's very sweet. I think I love many of them. I'm not sure if I could say I love a mosquito, but like that, I understand they need to live. Flies, tarantulas, finches. Oh my goodness. Anti-finch person in the room. That's all right. Bees, pig. Wow. This is kind of, yeah, I've never actually asked this question before, so I'm kind of enjoying this. All right, so a lot of themes here, right? So these are animals that maybe you think of as creepy crawly, or maybe rats. They get into things, things with sharp teeth that can be frightening to you. And I just wanted to include this tapestry of unliked animals because, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, usually a misunderstood animal, or one that's kind of vilified or persecuted, is one that pisses us off, right? Sometimes it's the scary, slimy ones, but often it's the ones that like can adapt to what we're throwing at them and persist and get into things. So like rats, for instance. And so if you kind of pivot your thinking around misunderstood or vilified animals or gross animals and think, wait, what is that really cool adaptation that they have, or that resilience that they have? That's the thing that makes me upset that they exist. Like, it's kind of a nice way to retwist your thinking around them. So to illustrate an infamous case of conflict with one of my two main study species, the coyote, this is a video of Carl the coyote filmed anonymously in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park in 2021. And it gives us a window into how the heterogeneity of human experiences can influence human-wildlife interactions and conflict. So some people don't notice him at all. Like, this woman is going to be reading a really good book. There she is. But meanwhile, his goal in the end is to actually stalk and try to get the toddler that's going to come into frame at the end of this clip. And Carl actually showed these unusually bold predatory behaviors toward toddlers, like many times. This is a testament from someone who submitted kind of their experience, that he was lethally removed later that year in 2021. He was shot. So there's the toddler. Fortunately, nobody was hurt, but he came close so many times that they had to kill him. But before all of this, the story actually runs a lot deeper than that. Carl was being illegally hand-fed by a woman suffering from homelessness in a nearby park for many years because that was her companion, right? And when she passed away, he made his way to Golden Gate Park and started exhibiting these bold behaviors because he had been receiving food rewards from people, and this kind of morphed into a predatory behavior. But you can see that all of this kind of trickles back to the societal inequities of which that woman was a victim, right? And many, if not, I would say most human-wildlife interactions are oriented around societal issues that people are facing. And there can be so many drivers of human-wildlife interactions. Many of them are multifaceted and can have deep, deep historical roots driven by human culture and politics. I included this was one of my inspirations way back in the day, a paper by Rahema White and colleagues, where they were saying essentially conservation conflicts can't just be predicted by ecological components on the landscape. It's also social and economic components, societal components. So we think about things like ecological features, sure, that's very important, but also things like pollution and redlining and segregation and societal inequities that feed into how these conflicts play out across the landscape. And negative interactions like human-wildlife conflict can be particularly concentrated in cities and in rapidly developing landscapes, where humans and wildlife come into close proximity with one another, and where intentional landscape designs based in human systemic biases like racism and classism can have these intense and apparent trickle-down effects onto the landscape heterogeneity and onto human experience. As just one example, we can look at redlining, which was a policy from the 1930s to 60s in the USA, which was designed to suppress the wealth of Black neighborhoods and prioritize pouring wealth into white neighborhoods. And the effects of redlining can be seen in urban segregation today, like with skewed urban vegetation patterns, and they can have a number of trickle-down effects that then extend to human and wildlife well-being and human-wildlife interactions. So in other words, life finds a way. I love Jeff Goldblum, y'all, I can't. Especially for behaviorally flexible, resilient species like hyenas and coyotes. But how and what the resulting interactions with people look like can be driven by a myriad of different factors, and they can be really complex. So that's why we use an intersectional and interdisciplinary lens to study the movement of these animals through these human-dominated landscapes and also their interactions with people. We also try to integrate community perceptions and social ecological data of varying kinds to better understand this picture more holistically, and bring in that empathy that I was mentioning earlier. And then we use both the science and the stories around that science to try and foster coexistence and well-being for both people and wildlife. So sometimes I like to bring in the nitty-gritty for those of you who are like, how the heck do you do all that? So how do you catch a coyote or a hyena? So while we use these interdisciplinary frameworks and methods, a good chunk of what I do involves GPS tracking of animals. So I wanted to jump into some of the methods for those of you who haven't been exposed to them before. This is a coyote collar on the left, and then these are a bunch of hyena collars that I took off some hyenas last year. The next slide has a lot of meat, raw meat on it. So if you're not a fan, close your eyes. So how to capture a hyena. I don't always have bait when I go to capture hyenas, but last year when I was decollaring hyenas, taking the collars off, I was fortunate to be gifted hundreds of pounds of rotting cow meat. And as a vegetarian, it was especially exciting for me. So that car, my friend Simon's car that we're putting this meat into, or that I'm making them put the meat into, was our refrigerator in the 120-degree heat for 5 days of this operation because we didn't have a fridge. And also to top it off, a lot of the time we had to drive with the windows rolled up because it was so dusty. So that, yeah, it was a good time. And then we'll tie the meat to the tree with like really strong wire so that the hyenas stay in the area longer. And it's really important when you're decollaring animals because you're looking for a specific animal. Sometimes there was a time where I had 95 hyenas around me and none of them had the collar, and it sucked, but it's nice to have something to keep them around. And then how do I actually get them to come around? We use something called call-ins. So I put a speaker on my car and I play sounds. So I mentioned earlier, spotted hyenas have this really intricate social structure. And part of that is they communicate with their body language, they communicate with sounds. And I know some of you have heard that spotted hyenas laugh. We'll get to that in a second. So we use some hyena sounds, but we also use prey and distress. So again, if you're squeamish, close your ears because you're about to hear some prey and distress. And these are actual clips from these audios that I play for like sometimes hours at a time. Okay, so here is a buffalo calf in distress. Not bad. I mean, that one's really tempting for them. They do come around for the buffalo. But this one, it's going to be a little shrill. So prepare yourself. This one, I really listen to this for hours at a time. It's a warthog, obviously in distress. A little alarming. Works really well, though, to get them in. And then the next one you're going to hear, and listen carefully, I kept this clip a little long because we're all going to do it together after. This is the whoop. Very famous hyena call. They basically use it, it's a long distance call to bring other hyenas in, maybe when there's a kill, something exciting, or just to be like, hey, where are y'all at? So here we go. Pretty well named. So this clip, they actually had a kill. And then there's more whoops that join in later. Okay, are you ready? Because we are gonna whoop together. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Woo! That wasn't loud enough. Okay, one more time. 1, 2, 3. Woo! Okay, that was awesome. Okay, dope. So, and then the last one, famous one. So the giggle is, everyone's like, oh, they laugh. It's actually a combination of two things that's happening with the giggle. So sometimes they're feeling really excited about something and they're like, hee hee. And then sometimes that social ranking comes into play. Everyone's gathered around a carcass. And then one of like the higher ranked individuals is like, hey, wait, that's my cut of meat. And the lower ranked one will be like, oh, I'm so sorry, right? And like, that's where the giggle comes in. So this is the giggle. I love how it always, without fail, makes people laugh. I mean, you just can't not. And then this is just, I'll show a short piece of this video. So we bring them around, maybe we have bait, maybe we don't, and then we use a dart gun. That's my friend Kami. She's a vet, a wildlife vet for Kenya Wildlife Service. The dart gun is actually between us. It's a bit cut off. I think the projector's a little cut off. That's fine. And she's just darted this hyena, and we're waiting for the hyena to go down. And it's gonna play. Nope, not gonna play. Well, okay, anyway, well, that's the dart gun. So sorry, you're gonna go see that video, but if you follow me on TikTok at The Scrappy Naturalist, all the videos are there. All right. Okay, it didn't work, but that's fine. So then coyote capture is a little different. We don't dart them on site. We actually set traps for them, either some sort of leg hold trap. That's one of the legal ones. There are neck snare traps that have a stopper so that it doesn't cause them any harm. This thing here, the colorum food bait, that's a special canid-centered trap where basically they bite down on this bite matrix where you put this food bait or something other than that that's delicious, like rotting chicken or whatever. You know, rotting meat's like a big thing for me. And they bite it and they pull because that's a very dog-like motion. And then it throws this loop over their neck, which doesn't harm them in any way. And so that helps you to avoid bycatch of other species. And then you also want to put some other things in. So this thing up here is something called deception. It's a lure. It's like a kind of like a pheromone scent that you can put somewhere high up off the ground so the wind can catch it and the coyotes can smell it from far away. Every trapper has their own like magical mystery ingredients that they like to use for this. And then my favorite, coyote urine. You can buy industrial grade coyote urine right now, all of you, on the internet for like, I think it's like $10 or something. And you can sprinkle it around the trap and so that they're kind of sniffing around where they're gonna step. And if you're lucky, you have Jimmy, someone like Jimmy, who's a master caller. We'll see if this works. He makes these tools where he can basically do different calls, whether they're coyote calls or what's gonna be here, which is a cottontail in distress. So this was actually so effective that an owl swooped down on our heads when he was doing this, and it was like sort of frightening actually. And that just brings them into the area, right, so that they can more easily find the trap. And this is just an example from last fall. We were collaring in Irvine, and we've just collared this guy, taken the muzzle off. That's Neve Quinn. She's awesome. She's based in Irvine, UCA&R. She's the human wildlife interaction specialist for Southern California, including here. So She's on maternity leave right now, but awesome person to connect with later. And then that's Jimmy, our master trapper. And then you'll see him run off into the distance. Toodles. Okay, so that's how it goes. And then once we've got the GPS collars on, what do we do next? So as a social ecological researcher, I integrate different methods and data sources with my collar data to get a more holistic picture of what's going on. So I'll use things like camera traps, motion sense camera traps. I work a lot with community members. For this case, we were working with 400 community members on participatory mapping in my Kenya field site, basically asking them their experiences with predation events on their livestock, where they would prefer carnivores to live, that kind of thing. And that's all kind of getting back to this figure I told you about before, where you need to be considering all the different elements that could lead into human-wildlife interactions. And then as some examples of what you get from this, for instance, with the hyenas that I study in Nakuru County, Kenya, at a baseline, the collar data can show us where they move, even at extremely fine scales, and where each hyena clan prefers to range. So on the right is their home ranges based on a couple of years of GPS collar data. This is just a couple of days, like 2 or 3 days of GPS collar data from 6 spotted hyenas. And you can see the blue one actually travels between the 2 protected areas. So there's 2 protected areas here if you look closely. And they're doing some like very weird stuff that you can find out by using fine scale fix rates, a fix every 5 minutes at night when they're active, to see how they're moving into each other's ranges in ways that hyenas normally don't do, because we work in these really, really small protected areas where they need to do kind of weird stuff to make it work. But we can also loop in data from motion sense cameras that can supplement our understanding of where they move by showing us how they move. For instance, whether and how they are navigating the fences that are all over this place. So this video, they've renovated the fence. If you can't tell, there's like a mesh that he's squeezing himself through, just like a cat. So like it's a mesh that's like 4 inches by 4 inches. And this is a younger hyena. So we have this weird age-dependent permeability that we're learning about, where some of the age groups can go through the fence and others cannot. This fence, if you can see in the background, there are hyenas on the other side of the fence and hyenas on this side. This clan was split in half by fence renovations. And that's something we would not know without this tool, despite all the collar data that we have. So we're trying to work right now with the national park to figure out how to get that clan back together, or if that's just not going to happen. And then this is just an example of a hyena deciding whether to leave or not from the national park into the community lands, and then saying, yes, it is time. So these kind of supplementary ways of looking at how the animals are navigating through that you can't necessarily capture with collar data. And then we bring in the community source data on top of that lets us build models that show what predicts hyena movements and subsequent interactions with people. So for instance, in our case, at a landscape scale, ecological factors like water and vegetation availability, as well as human infrastructure like roads and fences, and human perceptions and tolerance all kind of come into play as far as habitat selection. But when we're using what's called step selection functions for this more fine scale habitat selection and decision making, hyenas are actually more influenced by human factors, so human infrastructure and tolerance. And so this tolerance element comes from our participatory mapping, where you can't necessarily ask someone, hey, are you poisoning hyenas? Or like, what are you doing? Like, because there's a bias there. So people don't often like to report on whether they're gonna do something negative to hyenas, even though we know that they're doing that in these areas. But what they will tell you is like, this is where I feel a lot of risk from hyenas. This is where I need to graze my livestock, and they're gonna get preyed on by hyenas. And so we were trying to see if we can integrate all of those community voices into these movement models as like a proxy for hazing and poisoning and that kind of thing. And it turns out you can. As another example, you can even use community elevating tools like participatory mapping to see how people's perceptions about human-hyena conflict are different from what we're seeing with our government and ecological and movement data. So on this map, the red spots are places where people have written on the map, we're experiencing a lot of conflict with carnivores. But that is not reflected in the government data where they kind of go out and they verify livestock predation. That's being missed by the government data. The opposite holds true for the blue. This is where the government is getting a lot of conflicts, logging them, verifying them, and people aren't as much concerned with it. So there's this spatial mismatch in people's perceived conflict and the verified conflict, and kind of bringing together all of those perceptions is really important for figuring out what's going on the ground. And this is the densest we're going to get, but diving a little bit deeper here to figure out try to predict the perceived livestock predation. We used a tool called geographically weighted logistic regression to see what predicts people's perceived conflict. So it predicts the fact that people are like, this is where I'm having my livestock killed by carnivores. So we've combined community participatory mapping data with interview data on this map. And I've circled 2 regions where people's perceived conflict with hyenas and with other carnivores is linked to these participants' beliefs that their children face threats from carnivores on the way to school. Similarly, on this second map, we can see that this cluster in the south of people's perceived conflict is predicted by the participants' beliefs that there is a shortage of wild prey in that particular area. So researchers and managers can use this kind of integrated data analysis to decide on targeted outreach for these particular communities. So can we provide transport for people's kids to get to school and avoid real or perceived conflict with carnivores? Can we do some more tracking in this area to see if there actually is a shortage of wild prey and what effect that's having on carnivores and how we can help people out? So basically integrating and elevating people's experiences to give more targeted, because there's no one size fits all conservation measure for coexistence. Switching gears a bit, since here we are in SoCal, for coyotes, I'm working with data from 20 collared coyotes. Does anyone live anywhere on this map? A few, like 10, 15 people. Maybe you live in a coyote home range even. So these are the home ranges and the 95% home ranges, 50% core ranges of 20 coyotes in LA County. Although that one on the right side is actually half in San Bernardino County, which was really annoying to analyze. I had to get all this random San Bernardino. Anyway, and you can see from their home ranges that they don't just live in the parks. They live in very urbanized areas as well down on this side. They can really make it work. But when we're looking at their movements across the landscape, we're looking at a lot of different variables. So for example, we have some of the classic variables you might look to, like park access. These are all the parks in LA County. Or vegetation greenness. Vegetation greenness, by the way, is not always correlated with parks access here in California because things are brown. But it's really important to also look into sociocultural factors like pollution burden. So have any of you heard of Cal EnviroScreen? Just a couple, maybe one. Okay, so Cal EnviroScreen is an amazing data set. Anyone who's gonna start working with data analysis, it's basically a pollution and human vulnerability indices. There's like 18 of them, and they roll some of them into a broader pollution index, but you can also break it out into like things like water pollution, et cetera. And then human vulnerability, they roll into an index, but there's specific ones. And so for this analysis, we're basically trying to say, hey, why are we not studying urban animals in their socio-cultural context as well as the ecological context when we know that they're interacting with people and with people's things all the time? And so looking at pollution burden is a really important component. And looking at things like median income. So how does wealth influence where animals are moving? We know that there is something called the luxury effect, where often wealthier areas are also greener because of all the resources and priorities that have been poured into those areas. And that can affect the ecology of spaces and whether or not coyotes are responding to that. So integrating methods for these coyotes has allowed us to see results like this one about pollution burden. It turns out that coyote movement is not just predicted by ecological factors, but also by sociocultural factors, just like I thought. And in this case, we're seeing that coyotes that live in areas with higher pollution burden have larger home ranges. So they're likely having to travel further afield to get what they need. But within those more polluted home ranges, these animals are actually choosing for more polluted parts of their home range, which is really counterintuitive. They're not just using green spaces as refuges. So we're thinking that the reason for that could be because pollution burden might be a proxy for quality or lack of municipal services in those areas. So maybe more trash for the coyotes to get into, more rats eating that trash, or maybe the prey that are in these areas that are more polluted are weaker because of the pollutants and they're easier to catch. We don't know yet. So that's something that we're working on going forward. And then last but not least, coyotes in San Francisco. We just came out with a paper actually last week about this work with San Francisco Animal Care and Control. They have a long-running coyote sightings database. There's also, you can report your coyote sightings in Southern California as well. But this one is like a really intricate database that we looked at the last decade of spatiotemporal trends of coyote sightings and conflict in San Francisco. And then we're gonna try and connect those trends to coyote movement from some coyotes that were collared by Presidio Trust and coyotes that will be collaring in San Francisco in the spring. So we're hoping to integrate, so this is just an example of some of the coyote movement data that we already have. With these sightings, this is a hotspot map of the sightings over the past 10 years in San Francisco, and get a sense of how people's experiences and reports are connected to what we're seeing with movement. And we're also trying to look at sociocultural factors, so how different things like redlined neighborhoods in San Francisco influence sightings and conflict and movement of coyotes. And you can see, it's a little hard to see, but those purple dots are the conflict instances for the past 10 years. And it's overlaid on what was actually a green lined area, so like one of the wealthier areas from the redlining historically, which still has quite a lot of wealthy people in it that like to report conflict because coyotes piss them off, and coyotes like to den near their houses because their houses have nice resources. So that's just an example. Oh, and also looking at this in regard to gentrification as well, because gentrification has changed the way that redlining's legacy effects play out in San Francisco, because gentrification has kind of swept across the city in a different way. So that's a lot to unpack. Why does it matter? So this lady, did y'all hear about this lady last year? A couple of y'all. So she's not the only one. This woman was illegally hand feeding coyotes. We were just on a coyote work group call last week. There's a couple of places where people are hand feeding coyotes steaks and chicken and dog food and stuff. And like this woman is not alone. And as we mentioned earlier with Carl, the coyote, this has trickle-down effects onto how conflict plays out across the landscape, not just where that woman is doing that. And that's not the only thing that's happening in the city that can influence coyote interactions with people. I wanted to also include, it's okay if you can't read this, I'll explain it. So this is last year, I think, from my old neighborhood in Oakland. It's on Nextdoor, a fantastically biased but very interesting data set. And this one's basically like, hey, my neighbor started feeding the coyotes and now they're following my family and I down the street. And it's scary. And then the one on the right, it's like, I talked to John, the neighbor. I told him to stop. And he was like, I'm not going to stop. I'm doing the right thing. And so this is just an example of like what someone does can dramatically influence way farther than what they're doing in that moment. And in cities in particular, really dense kind of urban or peri-urban areas, you have people from all different sociocultural backgrounds, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, all different experience levels with wildlife and understanding of nature that are living all together, smushed together, right? And what we do influences one another. So it's really important to be able to come together around some sort of understanding of coexistence and wildlife behavior and work together across our differences to not have things like this happen. So I have given you a lot to think about, I think, around human-wildlife interactions, and I'm curious what y'all have taken from this. For my last Slido, what words would you use to describe human-wildlife interactions? Messy. Oh, that's so true. Don't feed. Fed coyote's a dead coyote, y'all. Interesting. Uh-oh. Nice. Sad, complicated. Yes, very complicated. Very complicated, yes. I had a feeling we would end up with complex in the middle. Misunderstood. Bipolar. Y'all crazy. Interdependent. Humans are kind of dumb. I love the candidates. Not discussed enough. True, true. And one I haven't seen up here yet is polarizing, because that's definitely a thing. Inevitable. Yeah, that's true. Inevitable. Yeah. Yep. This is all it, right? So it's really, really complicated. There's no one size fits all. But the one thing that I think is common across all human-wildlife coexistence efforts is needing to listen to everyone that's involved and think really deeply about not just the ecology and the animal behavior, which are important, but also about how people have experienced the landscape over time and how they're interacting with one another, right? What are the human-human conflicts going on underneath it all that we need to work with? And that's kind of where I've been thinking a lot lately about the importance of narrative and how we relate to wildlife. I know y'all know who that is. Y'all better know who that is, P22, right? So for example, the story of P22, the famous mountain lion here, Hollywood cat, right? Poster puma for the massive multi-million-dollar wildlife overpass that's being built right now, the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Overpass. And he is a great example because what happened with P22 is that everyone got so attached to him and his story that when he started eating people's dogs, rather than the normal response, which would have been like, kill that awful mountain lion, screw that guy, everyone's like, oh, poor baby, what's wrong with him, right? And that's because the narrative had been built. And I don't think that anthropomorphizing and building narratives around individual animals is always the right choice. But I think we can make these choices to be strategic because without him, we probably wouldn't have raised all that money for that wildlife overpass that's going to have positive effects for many, many more animals than just mountain lions. So how do we think about those multi-species benefits that we can build from narrative? And why is this important? So climate change is exacerbating human-wildlife conflicts, bringing people and wildlife into closer proximity to one another. We have to be ready to use, yes, animal movement, but also community engagement, couched in theories like One Health, the interconnectedness of all aspects of environment, animals, plants, people. And use all of those components together to assess the science behind wildlife well-being being linked with human well-being, right? And then use that science to create stories and foster stories and build policies that help us to have coexistence into the future. So the biggest lesson that I've learned from all of this work and what I try to bring actively into how I approach my research and my community is that nothing fits into neat little boxes. Just like you said, complex, right? The way that Western science wants it to. Western science is all about neat little boxes. So I think about a lot of this work in the realm of queer ecology. Some of you might have heard of queer ecology. If you haven't, in short, it's basically all about finding the lies in those lines that we draw, in those lines around those boxes. There's always gray area. There are always lines. There are always lies in those lines. Objectivity doesn't actually exist, even though we've been taught that in Western science. It's super important. Why do I say objectivity doesn't exist? How is that possible? Even the questions that you choose to ask and the funding that you're getting and how you choose to answer those questions are all subjective choices, right? So something to really think about. So I've been trying to recognize that we should bring our whole selves into advocating for what we're doing in our work as part of that acknowledgement of those gray areas and those lack of boxes. And one of the ways I'm doing this, kind of using my intersectionality to provide an avenue of hope, right? So I co-founded Black Mammalogists Week. Please check it out. We do have scholarships every year for Black and Indigenous folks working on anything related to mammals to try and change the lack of representation in wildlife science and communication. I've also been, again, incorporating queer ecology in my science communication with a series called Queer is Natural, kind of showing where queerness exists throughout the animal kingdom. Spoiler alert, all over the place. And I think that being as authentic as we possibly can and serving as role models to those that are less advantaged or more vulnerable than us is a really, really important thing for us to do, both in science and beyond. So just want to thank all of these awesome people, my funders, Schmidt Science Fellows, Nat Geo, et cetera. And I can take any questions. I think there are microphones around here for questions maybe, but I'm not sure where they are. Don't be shy. Side note, I was really shy. I didn't talk until 8th grade at all, nary a word, which is why I talk so much now.
Just raise your hand if you've got a question.
This one up here.
Hi, before you explained about the example with the coyote trying to target the toddler, I want to hear, like, what do you think? Do you believe that instead of putting it down, should we have relocated, or do you think, is there any other options we could have done?
So the question was, for Carl, were there other options aside from lethal removal once he started to attack toddlers? It's a really good question. It's a hard one. There's only been one paper where they tried to figure out like what was the effective move in that kind of situation. And they did find that like removing that problem individual was the best option, because nobody wants your coyotes, right? Like that coyote might end up in a place where it does that again because it's already been habituated to receive those rewards from people. And it's really sad, and you might feel sort of despair about that, but that's kind of why we're doing work to prevent the animals from getting to that place in the first place. And really, you know, a fed coyote is a dead coyote is the truth, because that could end up happening. Because if they were an endangered species, maybe there'd be a place for them, but because they're so common, I work a lot on keeping common species common. People wouldn't want them. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm a huge advocate for diversity in science, and I want to focus in elementary students. So your lecture, I was just wondering on your opinion through the diversity of animals and how you explained it. Do you think that this way of explaining it, like the diversity of cultures, different animals, can be a good like example for kids to learn about diversity in wildlife and science, and potentially even through learning diversity of animals, learning diversity of people?
That's such a great question. If you didn't hear, they were asking if wildlife, the diversity of wildlife can be a lens for which elementary school kids or other kids can learn about the diversity of people. I think in short, yes, like it's definitely a fantastic avenue to be able to sort of celebrate the diversity of all life, right? Including people and animals. And then I also have like an add-on to that. When I'm thinking about, for example, Queer is Natural, the series that I run, which is about queer animals, I created that series as like sort of a clap back to my homophobic family, who's like very much like queerness is not natural and whatever. And I'm like, you're wrong. And like, I just made this very science-y clap back for them. But in the background of my mind, I'm like, we shouldn't need this to get human rights for people, right? Like we shouldn't need this to celebrate and value the diversity of human life, even though I think it's a good tool. So as long as you have that in your mind of being like, this is not like this shouldn't be the justification for human rights, but it can be like a beautiful lens to introduce that to people. It's like a really bright light in my face, so excuse me.
Hi, I just had a quick question about how long you've been doing research. I know you mentioned a graph before about the routes and locations of coyotes and hyenas, and it said for over 10 years, so I was just really curious.
How long I've been doing research? I started working, I guess I've been doing research since 2007, but that was like on an island. I've been doing research in Kenya since 2010. And then I've been working with this Hyenas and Humans Alliance program that I run in Kenya since 2018. And I've actually only been working with coyotes since 2021. So like I made a conscious, I've been living in the Bay Area since 2012, and I made a conscious decision to build my postdoc and my science program after the PhD in my community, because I do so much community-oriented work. So that's why I purposely am working in California as well on these parallel issues.
Thank you.
Hi, I was wondering if you see a difference between the societies in Africa who live amongst animals. And I say this because in India, we grow up and there are cows interacting with people and on the streets, stray dogs everywhere, and rhesus monkeys that are in your yard. And the attitudes here where anything foreign is removed. It's all very, ordered. Did you notice differences in the attitudes?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it depends, but I can point out one like huge difference between I think what you experienced in India and also Kenya and what we experience here as far as large carnivores are concerned, which is that we killed off all of our large carnivores here in the US, and then we let our cattle free on the landscape. And now that they're recovering or being reintroduced, people are pissed off because we are just not used to living with those animals. And we don't have like the tools or the understanding of how to do really basic things. Like for instance, there's a type of intervention for for livestock carnivore conflict called range riding in the USA. It's been around since like 10 years ago, but it's being touted as this new amazing thing where people ride around on horseback or on ATVs and keep track of where the cattle are going and keep the wolves away from them. But if you look at the crux of it, it's just herding, which has been around since, thousands of years, time of Jesus Christ, right? And people around the world, many communities have never stopped herding. It's just we didn't need it because we killed everything. So that's like one example. The other thing I think that's really important is that the urban dwellers in the US are super excited about reconnecting with nature to a large extent. And so they'll do things like in Colorado where the urban voters voted to reintroduce wolves, and the rural ones where the wolves would actually be, we're like, screw these guys, like we don't want wolves. But it's the urban folks making the decision. So there are some things in place that are kind of being proposed, like payment for predator presence, where people who are excited about wildlife pay the folks who are having to deal with wildlife on the ground to have that presence. So like that's kind of like a big difference, I think, between the two places. That being said, like I've worked in some parts of East Africa where it's like a more homogenous culture. Like I've lived with Maasai, et cetera. And so like when you have interventions that are conservation interventions for groups that have lived in a place for, thousands of years and have like a similar culture as one another, those interventions are hard to implement because there's cultural differences, but easier to implement because once you implement it, everyone can adopt it in that area. Whereas like where I work in Nakuru County, Kenya, it's like one of the fastest growing places, lots of immigration into the region, lots of different types of folks, just like any urban area, right? It's becoming an urban area. And so you can't get all of these different ethnic groups to agree on everything. The way that you could maybe like harness a culture to change to being lion guardians or something when they used to kill lions. So there are some similarities as well.
We have time for one more question. And I think, okay, can we squeeze in two more?
Two more. Yeah.
Hello. I just wanted to say, first of all, that I thought your presentation was really interesting. My question is, you put a lot of focus on like implementing like social sciences and like intersectionality into like studying animal habitats. So like, did you sort of do the opposite from your research into like how animals are moving around in an area, learn more about human sociology in a way?
It's a really, really good question. To some extent, yes. Like, so for instance, this San Francisco coyote reporting thing, when you look at, if you go and read the paper, a lot of people are asking me, like people who are trying to do press releases or whatever, like, so conflict is increasing according to your paper. But I'm like, no. Conflict reports are increasing. That's different. So that kind of data set, the community curated data sets, including things like iNaturalist, which you might have used, tell us actually a lot more about the reporter than they do about necessarily like the ecology or the biodiversity. They could tell us some things, but always with a caveat. And so when I'm having an undergrad student studying redlining and gentrification and how that influenced reports, I spent a long time going over with her, hey, like it's not necessarily about whether conflict is influenced by these things. It's about people's experiences of conflict and how they're reporting that. And so in some ways, using community science data sets, even next door, is a way of kind of bringing in an understanding of what people are experiencing in response to wildlife. But I definitely am not like a sociologist. So I'm not like the best person, I think, to do that in a really in-depth way. But it's a really neat idea.
All right. My question would be, so I know your presentation was a lot about the research that you've conducted and the projects that you've been on. I have a question about, so how did you get in a position to be able to do all these things is it all just obtained through higher education? I know you've obtained your PhD, and I'm assuming that obviously opened up a lot of avenues and opportunities. But for instance, let's say someone like me, you know, I mean, I'd love to go to Kenya and do all these things. What would be your advice?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. So how I started out in science. So I mentioned I grew up pretty poor. And so I didn't know, and I also didn't know much like about how to get involved in research or anything like that. But I was, when I was heading into Cornell, they basically reached out to like a subset of people from underrepresented backgrounds to join this National Science Foundation program to go and do research on an island and like learn how to do research, marine science research. And so through that, I was able to get a mentor, the woman who ran that program, or like who had applied for that money essentially, who was kind of tracking our all like 10, 15 of us's movements throughout undergrad in a way where like I don't think that I would have understood like how to navigate any of the science. So how can that translate to you? Like maybe there isn't a program that you can tap into like that, but you can find people who can mentor you. So the way I've gotten many of these opportunities, like I lived in Uganda for a year, ran a project because I kept in touch with someone, right, that had taught me for a class. Or I cold emailed so-and-so to learn more about like what they were doing in this area or to get advice. People love giving advice when they have expertise. They love talking about advice, right? So just do not be afraid to cold email people. I've been cold emailed myself, and I try really hard to get back to every single person and be helpful. People, you would be surprised what will come from just reaching out to those that are doing work that you're interested in, even if it's like, sorry, I can't bring you to the field, but like maybe I can give you this data set and we can talk about it and you can work on it for your senior thesis, you know, like that kind of thing. The other thing I've started to notice, at least at Berkeley, I've mentored quite a lot of undergrads through 2 apprentice programs they have there, where you can work with a faculty member or a postdoc or a grad student on research. So look for those opportunities because those often get spun into senior theses as well, and then like into further opportunities. And also, this might seem kind of basic, but office hours. So I've had students who continuously come to my office hours in the semester that I taught, that then like I'm advising them even today. I just wrote a grant recommendation for one of them who's trying to get into a PhD program. And he did his senior thesis with us as well. So yeah, just kind of staying in touch. Don't be afraid to learn new things. Don't be afraid to just take opportunities. Like you don't need to have a set direction, like explore a lot, definitely explore a lot, volunteer on projects. I think people should get paid for internships. So advocate for yourself to the extent possible. Yeah, sorry, that was a lot of random answers, but I can talk to you more about it later too.
Thank you so much. That's actually a great leeway into what we have next.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, so I just want to thank Dr. Wilkinson again. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you for coming to Cal Poly Pomona. Thank you again for sharing that, and you'll have the opportunity to meet and greet Dr. Wilkinson right after this. We have lunch available for the students, so if you all want to stick around and have some lunch with Dr. Wilkinson, we'll be handing out, or food is available in the back, but we want to thank, on behalf of me, Dr. Taras, and Dr. Blakey, thank you all so much for joining us for Diverse Stories in STEM, and again, thank you, Dr. Wilkinson, for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.